MYX II versus STRYDE. In today's video, we're going to be taking a closer look at the second version of the MYX Fitness bike and comparing it head-to-head against the STRYDE bike. As you may already know, I have a full review on the MYX II bike as well as a full review on the STRYDE bike, but in today's video, we're just going to be doing a quick, concise highlight reel basically of the major differences and similarities between these two bikes. So if you're trying to make up your mind whether you want to buy the MYX II bike or the STRYDE bike, hopefully this video will help clarify and help you make a decision. If you know anything about the STRYDE bike, you probably already know that the most unique thing about this bike is it comes with a tablet that's unlocked and you can basically run any platform you want on this unlocked tablet. Yes, STRYDE does have their own platform and it's great, but the unique thing is you can just pull up this little tab here and you can load up apps like Netflix or Peloton after you download them. For example, here you just press this Peloton button and it pulls up the Peloton app. So if you're not sure if you want to commit to any one particular platform or you want to keep your options open, the STRYDE bike is a great option for that. On the other hand, over here on the MYX II Fitness bike, you do not have the option to run the Peloton app. So if you're looking for a bike that you can do the Peloton app on, the MYX II bike will not allow you to do that. In order to use the MYX Fitness bike, you have to sign up for one of the two options available on the MYX II bike. Currently, I'm signed up for and using the OpenFit platform, but you can also sign up for BODI by BeachBody, which each of these platforms costs $29 per month at the time of this recording. And from my experience, both OpenFit and BODI are amazing platforms to work with, but you should be aware that if you do buy the MYX II bike, you will have to commit to one of those monthly recurring memberships at $29 per month. So that is by far the biggest difference between these two bikes, but let's talk a little bit about some other important differentiators between these two. The next most significant difference between these two bikes is the drivetrain, and this bike, the STRYDE bike, is a magnetic resistance bike, whereas the MYX II bike is a friction resistance based system. And we'll dive into the difference in the magnetic resistance system versus the friction resistance system and the flywheel mass and all that in just a moment, but the next thing I want to show you is the monitors. The MYX II Fitness bike comes with this beautiful 1080p 22-inch rotating touchscreen that rotates 360 degrees, although it does stop halfway, almost halfway, so it doesn't go completely forward and straight, and then you rotate it back around this way so you don't tangle up the cord this direction. As I mentioned in my previous video, the full review on the MYX II bike, the screen does not completely rotate 360 degrees technically, but it gets pretty darn close. On the STRYDE bike, you also get a beautiful 1080p 22-inch touchscreen. However, the difference on this screen is this tablet does not rotate this way. It does rotate up and down like this, however, not side to side. So if you do intend on doing off-bike workouts on the STRYDE bike, it's not going to be as convenient as rotating the screen. However, you can buy an accessory to add on here. I'll put a link to it in the description box below. It's pretty inexpensive and pretty easy to install from what I've seen online. And then once you add that accessory, you could also rotate the STRYDE bike tablet as well. One thing I would like to point out about the difference in the platforms here is since this is basically a locked tablet and you get two options, and since this tablet is designed for those two platforms in particular, it's super simple and seamless. And as I mentioned, the STRYDE platform does have their own app built in, which is super simple and seamless as well. However, if you want to use like the Peloton app or some other app or Netflix or YouTube on here, there's a little bit more configuring you need to do. But at the time of this recording, the Peloton app does not come pre-installed on the STRYDE bike, so you got to kind of download that and install it yourself. And there's a little bit of process there, but it's not too difficult. It's just a little bit less seamless to say, for example, to get the Peloton app running on the STRYDE bike as compared to, the MYX II bike already has all the software on there ready for you to go from the time that the delivery crew drops this bike off for you. It's ready to roll. That being said, if you did want to do the Peloton app on this, after you get it set up, it's set up and ready to roll, and it's not like something you have to do every time you plug it in. It's just like a one-time thing, and then you're good to go. Before we get into the drivetrain feel and talk about these flywheels, I would like to point out the physical size of these bikes. And okay, so each of these bikes has a maximum user weight listed at 350 pounds. They both feel very sturdy and robust. The maximum height on the STRYDE bike is listed at 6'5", which I'm 6'5", and I pretty much max out the max height for the STRYDE bike. The minimum height for the STRYDE bike is listed at 5'1". On the other hand, the MYX II bike is designed to fit a wider range of individuals. So the minimum height of the MYX II bike is listed at 4'11", and the maximum height is listed at 6'8". So I do not ride this bike on the maximum saddle height, the MYX II that is, whereas on the STRYDE bike at 6'5", I do have the saddle on maximum height. If you take a look, you could probably see that the saddle height on the MYX II bike is a little bit higher, and the MYX II bike is just a little bit larger bike in general. Also, you can see that the tablet is just sitting a little bit higher on the MYX II bike in comparison to the STRYDE bike, which the handlebars are set on the maximum height as well. And speaking of handlebars, there is something significant I would like to point out about them. On the STRYDE bike here, you can see the hand grip positions look like this. They're nice. It's a nice soft touch material. I like the feel of these handlebars. You get great hand positions down here for in the saddle and a nice position 3 out here for out of the saddle. There's also conveniently placed water bottle holders right here. The thing I want to show you is from the side angle here, you can see that they are bolted directly on to the stem here, and they do not have the ability to move forwards and backwards. But over here on the MYX II bike, there is a forward and backward adjustability for the handlebars on this bike, so that will help you further dial in your riding position. If you're on the extreme end of being really short or really tall, you can get the handlebars a lot closer to you or push them further away. That being said, I do feel that the handlebars on the STRYDE bike are sufficiently placed in a good location, and I don't find discomfort. I don't feel like they're too close or too far from me. But it is always nice to have the option to be able to move them forward or backwards if you want to. Taking a closer look at the handlebars on the MYX II bike, we can see that there's pretty similar riding positions. Not exactly the same, but a nice position 3, a nice thick and meaty grip. I like the feel of these grips, and also I like this grip. At first I thought it was kind of, a little weird that there is a U shape here, but I do find myself kind of just placing my hands like this on the MYX II. Another thing I'd like to note is there is an actual slight curve down on the handlebars on the MYX II bike. I like the handlebars on both of these bikes. They both feel high quality and robust. They feel good to grip onto, and I like them both. Another quick difference I'd like to point out is on the MYX II bike, you have holes to click into for raising and lowering the handlebars. And there's also holes that you need to click into for raising and lowering the saddle. For moving the saddle forwards and backwards, as well as the handlebars forwards and backwards on the MYX II bike, there's no hole to click into, so you do get micro adjustments for that, but you're not gonna get those fine-tuned micro adjustments for raising and lowering the saddle and the handlebars. But the holes that you click into are actually placed pretty darn close together, so it's not like you have a big gap between the holes. And of course, a benefit to having the holes is it will click into the slot with these nice soft touch handles, and it will stay locked in for sure. It's not going to slide down on you. On the STRYDE bike, there is no hole you need to click into for raising and lowering the handlebars, and the exact same thing is true for raising and lowering the saddle. You do get micro adjustments. There is no hole you need to click into, so you can fine tune precisely how high you want your saddle and handlebars. In addition to that, you can fine tune how far you want the saddle forwards and backwards, because there's no hole to click into for moving the saddle forwards and backwards either. And while both of these bikes do have dual water bottle holders up here, conveniently placed right up here by the tablet, the MYX II bike does not have a place for you to store your weights on the bike. As comparison, the STRYDE bike does have these weight holders on the back of the bike, so if you want to do workouts with weights on the bike, you can just throw your weights right back here. Real quick, I would like to point out the MYX II bike does come with a cage style pedal on one side, so you don't need any sort of special shoes to ride this bike. And in theory, you probably don't even need shoes at all to ride it. However, the other side of the pedal does have a standard SPD clip-in, so if you want to clip in on the MYX II bike, you can do that. As I mentioned in my full review of the MYX II bike, the pedal diameter threading is actually 18 millimeters on this bike. So in the case you did want to swap out the pedals on the MYX II bike, you won't be able to use the standard 14.3 millimeter pedal on this bike. And I don't think this is really a problem. The pedals on this bike are perfectly fine, but I just want you to know it is an 18 millimeter thread. And on the STRYDE bike, you also get a dual-sided pedal with a cage on one side, so you get the same riding options as on the MYX II bike. and on the other side you get a SPD clip in as well. The difference here is on the STRYDE bike there is a standard 14.3 millimeter pedal diameter, so you can basically put on any standard pedal on the STRYDE bike. So in the case you want to swap out the pedals on the STRYDE bike, it's much more compatible with more pedals on the marketplace, and you can take some Peloton pedals and throw them on the STRYDE bike. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, the STRYDE bike is a magnetic resistance bike and the MYX II bike is a friction resistance bike. Additionally, the flywheel mass on each of these bikes is pretty significantly different. Looking at the flywheel of the STRYDE bike, we can see that there is dual magnet stacks. So you get one on each side of the flywheel, and it is magnetic resistance. And the flywheel mass is listed at 30.5 pounds on the STRYDE bike. As comparison, the MYX II bike is a friction resistance bike with a leather friction pad, and the flywheel mass on the MYX II bike is listed at 41 pounds. And I'm gonna hop on both these bikes and share my opinion and experience comparing these two drivetrains head to head. But real quick, I would like to point out that in general, a friction resistance bike does much better when it has a heavier flywheel. So a 41 pound flywheel on this MYX bike actually feels really good. And with the dual magnet stack on the STRYDE bike, the drivetrain feel on the STRYDE bike is super smooth with that magnetic resistance. Also, the 30.5 pound flywheel feels really good on the STRYDE bike. The resistance knob on the MYX II bike is a physical resistance knob, and you also get a physical resistance knob on the STRYDE bike. So whether you choose the STRYDE bike or the MYX II bike, you're not gonna get automatic adjusting resistance on either of these bikes like you do get on the Peloton Bike Plus back there. However, the big benefit is both of these bikes are significantly less expensive than the Peloton Bike Plus. And that leads me into my next major point about how these two bikes work kind of significantly different from each other. The MYX II bike is a friction resistance bike. So on the MYX II bike, you do not get a number up here on the screen for your resistance number. Instead, the MYX II bike uses heart rate zones largely to determine how hard you're working. There is also a cadence sensor built into this bike. So really the two metrics you get are cadence and your heart rate. On the other hand, on the STRYDE bike, you get a cadence number as well as a resistance number on a scale from 0 to 100 right up here on the screen. And also you get a estimated power output in terms of watts on this bike. So the system that the STRYDE bike uses here for metrics is much more in tune and on par with what Peloton uses. So, you know, if you're gonna try and use a Peloton digital app here on the STRYDE bike, it's a lot more intuitive having a number to follow for your resistance number as well as viewing your output in terms of watts. Additionally, as you ride, you get a total output number here in kilojoules. So if you're the kind of individual that likes to see your resistance number right up here on the screen and know your metrics like power output and your total energy exerted, the STRYDE bike does give you that data. But that's not to say that the MYX II bike doesn't give you good data as well, because there is heart rate zone training on the MYX II bike. And really just using that heart rate data in tune with the cadence sensor, how fast you're pedaling, those are gonna be your main metrics on the MYX II bike, whereas on the STRYDE bike, you can also hook up a heart rate sensor in addition to this data. So, you know, you can get your heart rate data on the STRYDE bike as well, but you're not gonna get your total power output measured in terms of a number as well as having your resistance number up on the screen. So on the MYX II bike, it's just a little bit more intuitive and natural process that you feel out by turning the resistance knob, and you know, you're just feeling how much power you're putting out through your legs. You don't get that number on the screen, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because you know, with that number up on the screen, that resistance number, maybe you can get a little bit too hyper focused on your power output and all of those metrics rather than just being more in tune with your body and, you know, measuring that one metric that really does matter and make a big difference. What is your heart rate? How high is your heart rate? What zone are you training in? Zone 1, Zone 2, or Zone 3? Long story short, the metrics on these two bikes are a little bit different. You get cadence on both of them. You can use heart rate monitors on both of them. You're just not gonna get that resistance number and power output on the MYX II. Also, while we are talking about that resistance number and using the STRYDE bike with a different platform like Peloton, for example, just because both of the scales go from 0 to 100 does not necessarily mean they correlate, because they don't. They are, it gives you a rough idea, but it's not the exact same for each of these bikes. And before I hop on each of these bikes and explain the drivetrain feel, I would like to point out each of them do have speakers. They are reverse mounted speakers, so both on the MYX II bike as well as the STRYDE bike, you get speakers. They are not, powerful speakers. They work, they're sufficient, but both of these bikes do have the ability to hook up your own headphones. The MYX II bike does have an audio jack right here on the bottom side of the tablet, and the STRYDE bike also has a 3.5mm jack right here on the right side of the tablet. And you can also hook up Bluetooth audio to each of these bikes, so if you have wireless earbuds, you can use those on either bike. So hopping on the MYX II bike, first thing I really like about this bike is I just fit this bike really well. I'm particularly tall at 6'5". As I mentioned in my full MYX II review, I do not ride this bike with a saddle at maximum height. On the STRYDE bike, I do ride it on maximum height. And the drivetrain feel on this bike, I like it. It's really great for a friction resistance bike. Right now, there is no resistance on, the pedals turn over nice and easy. You can hear there's basically no sound. And then as I add on a little bit of resistance with that leather pad, resistance comes on quickly and a small amount of noise happens. If you want to see more about what it sounds like, watch my full review on this bike, but this is just a comparison of drivetrain feel. And at like a medium resistance, if I hop up out of the saddle on this bike, it feels nice to ride, it's smooth. Just makes a little bit of noise, but I really like the drivetrain feel of this bike. The 41-pound flywheel on the MYX II bike works really well for this bike because it really helps carry that momentum and inertia through each pedal stroke. So like riding out of the saddle, it feels really smooth and good to ride. And as I mentioned in my full review of the MYX II bike, you can really crank on the resistance really high and really get a super high maximum resistance out of the MYX II bike. Additionally, with that 41-pound flywheel, the MYX II bike feels good to ride at a high resistance. Some of the friction resistance bikes I've rode in the past, it starts to feel choppy towards the top end of the maximum resistance. Not with the MYX II bike. This bike still feels smooth towards the high end of the resistances. So let's see how this compares to a magnetic resistance bike. Let's hop on over. Okay, so over here on the STRYDE bike, the first thing I can notice is this bike is just physically a little bit smaller. So, like I mentioned, I'm 6'5", and I have the saddle on max height, the handlebars are on max height, and I'm basically at the top end of the height spectrum for this bike. As I begin to turn the pedals over here on the STRYDE bike, I can notice right away that the flywheel does feel a little bit lighter. However, the resistance on this bike feels smoother because it is magnetic resistance. And as I begin to add on resistance, the number shows up right here on the screen. And it shows me my number on a scale from 0 to 100. And as I mentioned, you do not get that on the MYX II bike, but you do get your power output as well as a resistance number on the STRYDE bike. As I begin to crank up the resistance, there is really no change in the sound on the STRYDE bike. So the STRYDE bike is much quieter than the MYX II bike, just basically because this is magnetic resistance versus that friction resistance pad on the MYX II bike. At a medium resistance on the STRYDE bike, I like the drivetrain feel of this bike. They're both belt driven and they have very smooth feeling drivetrains. However, they are slightly different just because of the way they apply that resistance. So now as I crank up the resistance towards the maximum end of the spectrum on the STRYDE bike, it gets really heavy. And yeah, the maximum resistance on this bike, as you've seen in my full review, is really good. However, it's not as high of a max resistance as the MYX II bike, simply because this is magnetic resistance on the STRYDE bike, and those magnets can only do so much to apply resistance, whereas when you have a friction pad, you can really crank up the maximum resistance very high. That being said, on the STRYDE bike, you actually can apply friction resistance if you turn it past the maximum resistance of the magnets. And I can hear friction happening on the flywheel. Overall, I like the drivetrain feel of both of these bikes. They do just have a different drivetrain feel simply because the magnetic resistance versus the friction resistance and the different mass flywheels. So here's my final thoughts on the STRYDE bike versus the MYX II bike. Obviously, the biggest difference between these two bikes is the open platform versus not open platform design. So with the STRYDE bike, you don't have to commit to any monthly recurring fee. However, you do have the option to do that if you want. So you can sign up for the Peloton digital app and run that on the STRYDE bike, or you could sign up for the STRYDE platform itself, or you could choose to basically run anything you want on the STRYDE bike. On the other hand, while you don't have to commit to one particular platform on the MYX II bike, you do have to choose one of the two platforms available. At the time of this recording, each of those platforms is $29 per month. So you have to either go with BODI by BeachBody or use the OpenFit platform. And as we've talked about, some of the other big differences is the MYX II bike does fit a taller rider. The max height of that bike is 6'8", and it's just a bigger bike in general. It has a heavier flywheel. The next major difference between these two bikes is basically, it's a friction resistance bike versus a magnetic resistance bike. So on the STRYDE bike, the drivetrain does feel a little bit more smooth, and also you get that digital readout for the magnetic resistance number from 0 to 100, so you know what resistance number you're on, and it's a good reference to go from ride to ride and know what numbers you're riding on. The friction resistance system on the MYX II bike does make a little bit more noise than the STRYDE bike, and it's not quite as smooth as the STRYDE bike. However, it is one of the most smooth feeling, good feeling friction resistance bikes I've rode. In terms of drivetrain feel, I like the feel of both of these bikes. It's really just gonna kind of come down to a personal preference. Are you more of a go with the feel kind of resistance adjusting person, where you don't care about having that number up on the screen from 0 to 100, and you can just feel it out in your legs and know based on your heart rate how hard you're working? Or do you want that number up on the screen in addition to your heart rate? Because STRYDE offers both. You have your heart rate up on the screen as well as the number from 0 to 100, whereas on the MYX II bike, you're only basically going to get that cadence number as well as your heart rate for the data measuring your workouts. I think both systems are great. They just take a slightly different approach to achieve basically the same thing, measuring your output, how hard you're working, and how hard of a workout you're getting. The MYX II bike is a little bit better for taller people. The MYX II bike fits me better. I'm 6'5". I about max out the max height of the STRYDE bike, whereas on the MYX II bike, the MYX II bike could easily fit a much taller person than me. On top of that, the MYX II bike does have that forward and backward adjustability of the handlebars, so you can dial in your riding position a little bit better on the MYX II. Also, you do get that rotating 22-inch touchscreen on the MYX II bike, whereas on the STRYDE bike, out of the box, it does not come a rotating tablet. However, as I mentioned, there is an accessory that you can buy relatively inexpensive to add on to the STRYDE bike, and then you could rotate that tablet. So which is the better bike? Well, the truth is there isn't necessarily a correct answer to that question. As you've seen in this video, I've laid out the pros and cons to each of these bikes, and it's really just gonna come down to personal preference. I think both of these are great machines. They do things in a little bit different way. One of them locks you into a platform with a recurring fee, whereas the other bike, the STRYDE bike, you're kind of more open platform, or you can use the STRYDE app as well. I don't have any promises on what the current price for either of these bikes are, but I do have a link below the video in the description box. They are ballpark the same-ish price, ballpark, and there are various discounts and promotions going on through the year. And also, if you did buy through the link below this video in the description box, that would help support this channel at no additional cost to you. But as you already know, I'm not trying to convince you to buy either one of these bikes. I have lots of indoor exercise bike reviews on my channel, so be sure to browse my channel, take a look around, and find the bike that's right for you. Anyway, I hope this video has helped clear up the pros and cons between the differences in these two bikes. If it has helped you understand the differences, please give this video a thumbs up. Questions or comments, please leave down below the video in the comments section. Click that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in my next video.